Hello and good evening. Today we're going to talk about Egypt and the situation which has developed there since the military dictatorship of General Sisi came into power. The history of Egypt has been punctuated by struggles of the peasants, struggles of the working class in Egypt's factories, struggles of intellectuals against the regime of Anwar Sadat, who took Egypt into the neoliberal world market and transformed it in many ways forever, and his successor, Hosni Mubarak. How quickly things change. Today I have with me in the studio Sami Naguib, a social and political activist, a leading member of the revolutionary socialist movement, which was involved from the very beginning with the Arab Spring and the occupation of Tahrir Square and what followed. He is in Britain for a short time, so we took advantage of his visit here to speak with him. Sami, welcome. Tell me now, in terms of the mass movement which erupted spontaneously, but not completely spontaneously, explain to me the mechanisms of that, Sami.
It was both spontaneous and not spontaneous, in the sense that there were several years of protest
But
building
small
up.
ones.
Not small ones.
No.
From 2006 onwards, the workers' movement, you had the largest
Factory
and
strikes.
most widespread factory strike waves in Egyptian history. In 2008, you had near insurrection in the city of Mahalla, which has the biggest textile factory in the Middle East. Over 100,000 people went on demonstrations, burning Mubarak's pictures. Several people were shot dead, and this was just a few years before. So it was not, there were signs that we were moving towards that.
So there was a build-up.
There was a build-up. And on the other hand, there was a political build-up as well. There was a democracy movement split into two. Part of the secular movements under the Kifaya brand, which meant enough in Arabic, and the Muslim Brotherhood on the other hand. Again, putting pressure for democratic reform, ending the emergency laws, stopping the process of Mubarak giving his son the presidency.
That
which
was very important, was it not?
That was very important. But the eruption itself, from the 25th onwards, the scale of it was unprecedented. The people watching what was happening in Tunisia, of course, it was an electrifying, the effect was electrifying, and the same slogan came out.
We want the downfall of the
regime. The people want the downfall of the regime. It was amazing, and it overwhelmed the police completely.
So, yeah, that was obvious that the police could not do anything. The only force that could have acted, had Mubarak called it out, or what happened, we are not clear about, was the army.
Yes.
But is it the case now that even within the army there was hostility to Mubarak because they didn't want a succession from father to son, and they were fed up, or what? We don't know.
There are all kinds of, conspiracy theories about what the army did or did not do then, and why it acted the way it did. I don't think we will ever know the details of that, as usual. I think no, because consequent developments show that no, that they were scared of what was happening on the streets. They did not want to have a direct confrontation.
Because they would have had to massacre hundreds of thousands of people.
Exactly. They preferred the police as a buffer.
The history of mass movements globally and historically shows us that mass gatherings, even huge demonstrations, they do not develop in a linear way. They go up, they go down. And at their peak, unless they actually strike at the heart of the enemy, often the counter-revolution comes back and succeeds, which makes the social composition of the movement and its political leadership a key issue. Now, this movement took place in a milieu where direct politics or too much politics was frowned upon by lots of young people, and sometimes for good reasons. They hated the politics of the regime. They thought all politics was corrupt, that there was no good, that they had to rise above it. So effectively their demands were restricted. The demands to remove Mubarak, get rid of Mubarak, elections, new constitution, etc.
It was not about constitutional reform or just the question of Mubarak. The main slogans seemed vague, but they had a deep social significance. The slogans of social justice, dignity, and freedom. So it was wider than that, and the kind of social forces that were involved in it were wider than that. This was not a kind of youth, what was kind of put forward in the West as a kind of middle-class youth democratic movement, something like what happened with the transition in Eastern Europe and so on. No, this was much wider, much deeper. I mean, people don't realize sometimes that the main day of the revolution was not the 25th, it was the 28th. And on that day, the police force as a whole collapsed completely and disappeared for months. No police officer could walk on the street. No police car could move on the streets.
If the security services have left a city, if the city, say Suez or Alexandria, is effectively under the control of the insurgency, the next step in these cases is not just the radio or television stations, but is to actually elect a local power from below and create a situation where you have elements of dual power spreading in the country. Now, for that you need a sort of large political party stroke movement to suggest this. And you're saying that this didn't exist.
It existed, it was too small to affect a movement of that size. And the organizations that did get involved, like the Muslim Brotherhood, were 100% against
any actions like this.
Any action of that type, and actually played a role afterwards, after the fall of Mubarak, of protecting the state institutions, protecting the parliament, protecting even the structures, the buildings directly, and standing against any calls for further radicalizing the movement, whether on a democratic level. So, for example, there were, during the 18 days when the police force fell, there were elected local committees all over the country, mainly for protection on streets and so on, to organize traffic, to kind of, and started playing a very minimal but clear role on the streets.
A sort of primitive dual power.
Primitive dual power, but very quickly the Muslim Brotherhood in particular started to say, no, we want a parliamentary route. We want democracy as we know it.
So when we finally have what appears to be a victory, albeit a temporary one, and the first free election in Egypt, I think probably ever, is organized, the Muslim Brotherhood wins the election, Morsi becomes president. And once they come to power, the only way they know how to rule is what they have learnt from Mubarak. So they try and do deals with the intelligence agencies, the police, the repressive apparatus of the state, and they have very little, actually, to say to the movement which propelled them to power. They distance themselves from it, and finally they succeed in isolating themselves in a classic textbook fashion from the people.
Yes, it's important to, I mean, when you look at history of coup d'etats, of events that, like the one that happened in Egypt recently, if you look at Chile as an example,
yes,
even a left-wing, clearly left-wing Marxist leader and government, when it comes to power through a parliamentary route, and starts trying even to face the deep state, to face the army, the judiciary, and so on, it is extremely difficult. It requires enormous mass mobilization, and if you make concessions to the generals and to the judiciary, you lose.
Yeah.
And that's what happened even in Chile, with
Salvador Allende in
organized
1973.
Yes.
Yes.
So just imagine an organization that is not of the left, that is not particularly radical in any sense, that's very conservative, but comes to power because of a revolution, because of an unprecedented mass mobilization. Why do people choose the Muslim Brotherhood? It's the only large mass organization that is there and that seems to be in the opposition, and that is at least not corrupt, or seems to be less corrupt than the old regime. The other forces are too small. So they come to power and they are paralyzed, because to face the deep state, to face the generals, to face the judiciary, to face the big businesses that run the country, they would have to mobilize the street on a much wider scale. They would have to keep Tahrir going. They would have to keep the strike waves going. And they are not that type of organization. They'd rather try to make a deal with those that have the real power than open the gates to a revolution that even they would not survive.
But it backfired sensationally.
It backfired sensationally, yes. They were paralyzed. Because the regime, the people that continued to be in power, because the generals did not lose power. They made concessions. They let the Brotherhood in, but they still controlled the economy, they still controlled the security apparatuses, they still controlled all the major kind of... the judiciary was completely politicized and controlled by the military. We do not have an independent judiciary. And Morsi kept making one concession after the other to these forces in the hope that they would share power with him. They didn't. They were just waiting for the right moment
to get rid of him.
To get rid of him and to get rid of the whole process that brought them to power, which means to get rid of everything that happened since the 25th of January.
Now, so they got rid of Morsi. They orchestrated it in quite a unique way for a coup d'etat, building up a movement which appeared to be huge, packing Tahrir Square with their supporters, military helicopters going over Tahrir and being welcomed as liberators by the people gathered in the square below, and then an election in which your main opponents are not allowed to take part, and in which he wins a majority.
Yes, it was a very strange event, because on the one hand you have a real anger against Morsi and the Brotherhood for not achieving anything, for not doing anything. Same neoliberal policies, same relations with Israel, same relations with the US, same relations with the Gulf states. Nothing changed. They didn't come near the big businessmen. They used the same language of Gamal Mubarak, you know, we want investors to come. So what was the point? Where is the revolution? And they did not push for serious trials of those responsible during the Mubarak era. They kept saying that we have to do this using the same judiciary, which was all appointed by Mubarak. So in the eyes of many people that were involved in the revolution, they had betrayed the revolution. They had betrayed the hopes that were created by the revolution. So you had that movement. Part of that movement was genuine against Morsi. But you had, on the other hand, the old regime, the remnants of the old regime, the army, and so on, starting to plan, starting to use this movement on the streets to get back to power. And here you get the second betrayal of the revolution, which is by the left, the old left and the liberals and the Nasserists.
But for Sisi to win, there had to be a huge ideological campaign presenting him as the savior of Egypt, as the person who would actually saving the country from the evil Muslim Brotherhood, etc., etc. And this ideological campaign was largely, not completely of course, but helped by many former left-wing intellectuals. I was shocked. How do you explain this particular phenomenon?
Well, part of it has to do with the history of the positions that the left has taken towards the Muslim Brotherhood and towards Islamism. The idea is that this is a fascist movement. They have this analysis that says that this is a fascist movement and that therefore even a secular dictatorship is better than having a religious state. And again, they kind of neutralized the Egyptian army because of the history, because of their connection to Nasser. You must remember that the left in 1965 actually dissolved their organizations. The Communist Party and all the other main leftist organizations dissolved themselves to enter Nasser's
Arab Socialist
Union, which was controlled 100% by the army, by army officers. So this was no political party. So they have a history of doing that. But the tragedy is that in Nasser's time, you could understand the mistake. Okay, in Nasser's time, Nasser was anti-imperialist. Nasser carried out land reforms. Nasser nationalized the industries, the Suez Canal. There was this anti-imperialist side of Nasser, so you could understand that parts of the left would be confused by phenomena like Nasser. But now it is a much worse situation because Sisi is offering nothing. He is not anti-imperialist. He is not anti-Israel. Israel is very happy, actually, with the fact that Sisi is in power. He's helping them crush Gaza with blowing up all the tunnels that the Palestinians used, helping secure Israel's borders in every way he can. So, and he is 100% neoliberal. He is 100% for foreign investment, foreign companies, and he's a close ally of Saudi Arabia. He's financed nearly 100% by Saudi Arabia. So for the left to ally themselves with such fervor is a result of their fear of Islamism. And you must realize that the campaign that brought Sisi to power, the ideological campaign, was based on the idea that look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at ISIS, look at what is happening in the region because of these Islamists. The Muslim Brotherhood is ISIS. The Muslim Brotherhood will lead to this situation. Do you want this? Do you want people to be slaughtered on the streets? Do you want Egypt to turn into a blood? Do you want the army to disintegrate and the state to disintegrate? All this kind of campaign of fear that did not only affect sections of the left, affected sections of ordinary people that started to ask questions. Urban middle class was mobilized on this idea that we do not want anarchy, we do not want chaos, we do not want to be like Syria or Iraq. The army is neutral. The army did not stand against the first revolution. The army will carry out the will of the people, and these are the people. The problem is this expression, the people, because not everybody was on the 25th of January on the streets and 28th of January.
No.
And not everybody on the 30th of June were on the streets. There are different sections of the population, different classes with different interests and affected by different slogans and have different agendas. So what was very noticeable about the 30th of June is this contradictory nature of it. So no attacks on the police, no slogans against the army. All the slogans just concentrated on Morsi, on removing Morsi. Completely different to the earlier mass mobilization, which was against Mubarak's state and the left. Now, their argument was that we should have an alliance with the old regime, with forces of the old regime, the Mubarak regime, to get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood. That it is wrong to try to fight two enemies at the same time, that we should ally ourselves with what we call the remnants of the old regime against Mubarak. And you get clear statements from leading members of the opposition at that point, the opposition to the Morsi regime, Al-Baradei, the most famous of, saying that yes, the army should intervene. The army should save Egypt, total capitulation. And this is a big problem in Egypt because these were the figures that were seen by people who don't want the Muslim Brotherhood, who wanted the revolution, who saw these secular kind of left-wing leaders forming a real alternative and who voted for them en bloc. For example, another section that voted largely for Hamdin was the Coptic, poor Coptic people. That was the obvious candidate for them. he represented something that made sense.
So in terms of the repression, it's quite severe now.
It's unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented in Egyptian modern history.
Worse, much worse than under Farouk, worse than under Mubarak and Sadat.
Yes, this is a state apparatus that is taking revenge on a people that dared to say no to the regime, that dared to challenge the regime on the streets. So they're acting with a level of viciousness. It's like comparing Pinochet's period in power with previous dictatorships.
And who, apart from the Brotherhood, Sami, who is being targeted? Trade unionists?
Trade unionists, strikes are being banned, funnily enough using Islamic Sharia law. Judges, Sisi's judges, using Sharia law
to ban strikes?
To ban strikes. The repression is not only on the Islamists and on trade union and workers. It is also on all those forces that played a role in the 25th of January revolution. So, for example, all the youth movements, the 6th of April movement, the radical left that refused to capitulate to Sisi, the new political organizations that appeared during the revolution and refused to capitulate to Sisi, they are all under enormous pressure. And there's this new law that makes any demonstration illegal. And
yes.
Not only illegal, with ridiculous sentences. You can get up to 7 years for trying to organize a demonstration.
And torture?
Widespread torture and widespread death because of torture in all police stations. Yet the Sisi is nearly celebrated in Europe. He met everybody in Europe, from the King of Spain to Tsipras of Syriza, have met Sisi, welcomed the Sisi, held hands with the Sisi. He's going to Germany next month.
And he'll be welcomed.
He'll be welcomed. They had a big economic conference in Sharm el-Sheikh to help the Egyptian economy. The IMF was there, the World Bank was there, the European Union was there. All these major powers saying absolutely nothing about the repression happening in Egypt. The military assistance from the US is back with all
no problems
at all. The planes, the Apaches, he's being armed again. And this is a problem. This is a serious problem, and I think also it has to do with this Islamophobia.
So, Sami, how do you see Egypt developing over the next, say, 4 or 5 years?
I don't think the current situation is sustainable for any length of time, because first of all, you have all the strategic problems that led to a revolution back in place as they were exactly. Neoliberalism, same neoliberalism, even worse. Some of the neoliberal reforms of al-Sisi are things that even Mubarak did not dare
like what?
do. Like removing subsidies on energy.
They've done that.
They're doing that in a continuous way. This is unsustainable. The level of repression is unsustainable. During his reign, since the coup, over 40,000 people have been placed in jail as political prisoners, and over 3,000 people were killed. Now, this level of repression is not sustainable. Also, you must put into consideration that hundreds of thousands of young Egyptians experienced an actual revolution, occupied streets and squares all over the country. This experience is not going to evaporate. It can be defeated, but that will not be easy. It will not be easy for
because
this
it's
regime.
Present in their memory.
It is present in their memory. If you're talking about people who were 20 in 2011, they're still in their mid-20s now. And they will not be able to repress this whole generation for any long period of time, I think. And also, their regional situation is extremely unstable. Saudi Arabia itself, which they depend on 100%, is extremely unstable.
I agree with you
extremely
on that.
Unstable.
Yes,
the Yemen war is going in a very bad direction. They can't control Yemen. They can't. The deals between the Iranians and the Americans are scaring them. All these regional changes are very dangerous for the Sisi regime on the long term. There's no long-term prospect of stability, and therefore there's no long-term prospect of foreign investments, for example, coming into the country, any actual economic development taking place. And without that, you will get explosions again on the streets. People will go down to the streets again. So,
yes.
So we are in a counter-revolutionary moment in Egypt, but I don't think it will continue for very long.
In terms of political parties and political movements, had Morsi stayed in power as the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, as president of Egypt for the full term, I have little doubt that they would have suffered an electoral defeat at the end of that, by who we don't know, a coalition of forces. But the fact that they were removed brutally, that their people are locked up in prison, are being tortured, some are being executed, once again gives them the halo of martyrdom. And you know better than me the emotional impact of that on a people. So despite all their mistakes, people will forget many of their mistakes and think just of the repression. So this is not a force that is going to go away. But at the same time, a counterforce needs to be created.
Yes, that is the crisis of secular left opposition in the Arab world in general and in Egypt in particular, that by allying themselves with the generals against the Islamists in this brutal, with what was with the brutality taking place, means that the Islamists will re-emerge as the only viable opposition in the eyes of ordinary people. So even the people that were lost to the Muslim Brotherhood because of their failures in power will come back to the Muslim Brotherhood. So the people that want a secular Egypt are actually helping Egypt to become Islamic again by this suicidal tactic of allying themselves with the old regime.
Yeah, but you know, there are the following. For them it's the choice: a secular capitalist Egypt or a religious capitalist Egypt.
Yes.
And surely a third position has to be developed of a secular socialist Egypt,
yes,
with freedoms for minorities, all political parties, women, etc.
Yes, yes. And I think that the possibility for that is very much there. And this is not just simple optimism. What happened during the Egyptian Revolution, I'll give you examples. The participation of workers, the size and scale of the workers' strikes during the revolution, unprecedented. The creation of a whole new trade union, independent trade union movement. The participation of women, the largest ever mass demonstrations by women against sexual harassment, against women's oppression that took place during this revolution. The largest participation of poor of the Coptic community, and that gave the flavor of Tahrir as being that secular. The reason it was that secular is that there were so many Copts involved, there were so many women involved. It couldn't be. So it gave real possibilities for a left wing to be built. And it actually shows that even Egypt, that is seen in the West as being Islamic and very religious and so on, is not that religious, is not that Islamic. People want the same things that people want everywhere. And that they accepted. I was telling you that the radical left was very small, was too small to affect the larger picture. But it grew dramatically during the revolution. Not enough, sadly, to kind of change the end result of it, but it grew very rapidly. The Muslim Brotherhood cannot deal with the women's question, cannot deal with the Coptic question as a non-Islamic minority, are as neoliberal as Sisi. Therefore, they do not pose a real alternative. So the possibilities for a radical left to emerge in Egypt in what will probably be a long struggle against this dictatorship are there. And we saw the possibilities during 2011.
Sami, thank you very much. And I really hope you're right on this one.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.